All right, hey everybody, Miss Lynch here. This is the second half of Chapter 7's lecture. Okay, hopefully you have all your stuff in front of you. You know my spiel at this point. Okay, so let me see what. It's been an hour since I did the last video, so I've forgotten everything I've said, of course. Okay, last thing we talked about was our new Constitution, all right? Everything leading up to that had been under the Articles of Confederation, all right? And then we are, yeah, so we are, sorry, I had a brain fart for a second. We are up to the point of our Constitutional Convention, all right? So 1787, all right? We talked about what our new Constitution was striving to achieve. Okay, so I'm going to start on this slide, the limits of democracy, okay? Alrighty, under our Articles of Confederation, no national office had ever been chosen by popular vote, and the mode of choosing the House of Reps was a signal of the expansion of democracy, okay? So letting the electorate choose their representatives. All right, our Constitution, considered fairly progressive, but it did have its limitations. That's why this slide is called The Limits of Democracy, okay? But so the Constitution did not impose property nor religious qualifications for voting. Rather, they left this to the states to establish their own voting rules, which we will see has its own issues, particularly in the South, and you know, allowing democracy for people of color, basically. So, are there issues with leaving this at the state level? Sure. Okay, and we will see those things develop over time. But the initial thought is to, leave this at the state level. Okay. Overall, our new structure, our new Constitution, was less than democratic. The Senate composed of each state's most distinguished citizens, so our gentry, our highest class of people, are still remaining as our office holders, okay? Okay, yeah, and then the Supreme Court would be appointed by the president for life terms, which is something we are talking about currently this week with the appointment of Ruth Bader Ginsburg's replacement in the Supreme Court. Yeah, okay, I'll move right along. All right, but so, and something I'd hit on before with our new Constitution, there is our division of and separation of powers. As a way to hopefully prevent former issues like what was being seen in British Parliament, okay? So this is, they're trying to establish a democracy at its core, all right? Okay, our Constitution, it was written over the course of 4 months. It's considered sparse. It has 4,000 words. So, for a document governing a new nation, I guess that is pretty short when it comes down to it. But it will obviously have issues because we will get into amendments at one point, okay? So, our 4,000 word document basically was the briefest outline of this new structure of government, all right? There are two basic political principles in this. This is federalism, so our division of powers, okay? And then checks and balances, which is referred to as the separation of powers, okay? So federalism refers to the relationship between the national government and the states, all right? This strengthened national authority, and the president was charged with enforcing the law and commanding the military, so our commander-in-chief, right? Okay, under the Constitution, Congress was able to levy taxes, borrow money, regulate commerce, declare war, which declaring war was their first, point of business. Okay, so declaring war, dealing with foreign nations, issues in regards to, our first American communities and really this desire for land that I hit on before and we'll talk about after this. But anyway, so Congress is addressing our first American communities, and also their job was to promote the general welfare, okay? All right, the Constitution also included strong provisions to prevent states from infringing on property rights. Okay, so remember the property rights is being left at the state level, but there were provisions to make sure that it was done in what was believed to be the most democratic way possible. Okay. Also, our states are barred from issuing paper money in order to avoid inflation. Paper money had been an issue for us when we were still talking about the colonial era. And so in order to prevent any further issues with money, they barred any printing of paper money. That's something that, we will talk about whenever we get to the Civil War and the issuing of Confederate money, okay? But anyway, so that is barred, for these generations of early Americans, all right? Okay, the day-to-day affairs of the government, from education to law enforcement, remained in the hands of the states, all right? And even on a more local level than that. I drink all my coffee. Okay. Our separation of powers, or the system of checks and balances, was to prevent any branch of the government from dominating the other two. So, and I mean, we've all taken civics at this point, so you should be familiar with the system of checks and balances. But that's the core of its implementation. Okay? Balance against itself. All right. So the debate over slavery, which we've been talking about, this was not something that just entered public conversation beginning in the 1840s and peaked with the Civil War. Like I said, this was going on as a debate the whole time, okay? And last time I had mentioned with westward expansion, there is the stipulation of slavery almost being eradicated and then failing to pass by one vote, okay? But anyway, so the debate over slavery. The words slave and slavery do not appear in the original Constitution. And in fact, it contained strong protections for slavery. Remember, our wealthy planter classes are our office holders. So therefore, they are going to make sure that there are provisions in these laws that protect them and their own wealth, right? Okay. A slave trade clause prohibited Congress from abolishing the importation of slaves from abroad for 20 years. So in our upcoming chapters, whenever we get to the turn of the century, we will see whenever that 20 years runs out, okay? So we will definitely come back to this later. All right. And then I guess in chapter 6, I talked about the freedom petitions and organization. Also, we talked about advertisements on the rise in newspapers advertising for fugitive slaves, all right? So everything behind this movement the spike of fugitive slaves that's being seen leads to the Fugitive Slave Clause in our Constitution, okay? So extraterritoriality, which is the condition of bondage, regardless of where you go, this remained attached to a person, even if they escaped one region and went to another area where slavery was abolished. Okay, this, it didn't matter at this point in time, okay? Okay. Okay, back, sorry. Okay, there is also the 3/5 clause that is passed during this time, which provided that 3/5 of the slave population be counted, would be counted in determining each state's representation in the House of Reps and its electoral votes, for president. So this concluded that slaves were considered to be 3/5 of a person, okay? Okay, so I'm gonna move on to our next slide, slavery in the Constitution. Okay. The Slave Trade Clause allowed a commerce condemned by civilized society. Okay, so people are speaking out against slavery. Remember, it's a crime against humanity that was already being discussed, before this, okay? So it's being condemned by a majority or a significant population within society, okay? And so this will go until 1808, so that's that 20 years we're talking about. On January 1st, 1808, the first day of Congress, under this new Constitution, they prohibited the further importation of slaves, okay? As we know, because we'll get to the Civil War eventually, this does not eliminate the system of slavery, okay? It's just a shift in that process, all right? But so 1808, the further importation of slaves from Africa, or abroad, I should say, that ends, all right? So we will see the repercussions from this coming in the upcoming chapters, all right? Okay. Yeah, this had been suspended during the American Revolution. From 1788 to 1808, so this 20-year period, 170,000 Africans, enslaved Africans, were brought to the early United States as slaves. As we've hit on before, slavery really establishes itself, well, in British North America, but the Carolinas and Georgia, okay? And I know I've talked about Carolinas and Georgia a lot, all right? So in this 20-year period, 170,000 enslaved Africans are brought to America, and 100,000, so over half of that number, goes to Carolinas and Georgia, specifically South Carolina, okay? Yeah, our Carolinas had split, and so, yes. All right, so yeah, like I said, more than half of that number goes to these two states specifically. Okay. The Fugitive Slave Clause did not say who was responsible for apprehending a fugitive slave. Remember, I said that if they escaped and they went somewhere else, regardless of where they went, they were still considered to be enslaved, okay? But under the Fugitive Slave Clause, yeah, nobody knows who is in charge of apprehending this slave and making sure that they are processed in the legal system, okay? But so there's a lot of confusion about who is meant to handle this situation. So is it federal? Is it state level? Or is it the owner of this enslaved person, all right? Okay. Also, there's confusion about what judicial procedures would be employed to return this person to their bondage. And so this becomes a source of conflict, and will lead us into conversations about states' rights eventually, okay? how am I doing on time? All right. So the Three-Fifths Clause allowed the South to exercise far greater power in national affairs than the size of its free population warranted. Okay, so these numbers skew affairs for the benefit of our people in power in the South. And the clause greatly enhanced the number of Southern votes in the House of Representatives. Okay, so like I said, it's just skewing these numbers. Okay, so the last session of the CONCON, the Constitutional Convention, took place on September 17th of 1787, which was, well, for us, the anniversary was a couple of weeks ago, so that's Constitution Day. All right. I'd made a comment about Constitution Day affairs this year. But so September 17th, 1787. Lots of sevens, okay? Lots of S's, I should say. So this is the last day of that. This is what we know as Constitution Day today. So our 39 delegates signed this document. It was sent to the states for ratification and adoption. And the Constitution made possible a national economic market, national political institutions, reduced the powers of states, again, which will cause problems and be a point of contention later on, and sought to place limits on democracy, okay, our checks and balances, balancing and sorry, I was going to go down another rabbit hole, but checking all of these powers and making sure that there is a balance in our system, okay? So limiting those rights, placing those limits on democracy, and the ratification debate led to the original Bill of Rights, which we will then get into with our next chapter, I do believe. Okay, so let me see, just make sure that is where I want to leave off. Yep, I think we're good. Okay, so that is the second part of chapter 7. Okay, a little longer video than I thought. That's good. All right, if you guys have any questions about anything, feel free to shoot me an email, and I will see you for chapter 8. Okay, bye.